Mitch McConnell is salivating over the thought of Americans running out of money and becoming so desperate for survival that they are free and open to be exploited by corporations who will treat them poorly and pay them so meager, like such meager wages, they won't even be able to pay their bills. That's what Mitch McConnell is salivating over as we speak. Why do I say that? Well, he recently gave a speech and he was talking about the labor shortage, okay? And he wanted to express some optimism about the labor shortage. You know, for anyone who's concerned about all these positions that are going unfilled, he says, you've got a whole lot of people sitting on the sidelines because frankly, they're flush for the moment. Meaning they have so much money, they don't know what to do. So they're not working. What we've got to hope is once they run out of money, they'll start concluding it's better to work than not to work. This is how detached from reality our politicians are. And I say our politicians because remember, there were also some corporate Democrats who wanted unemployment benefits to end prematurely in the middle of a global pandemic. So Americans who felt unsafe going back to work would have no choice. They would be desperate and they would take any job regardless of what the risk would be to both their health and honestly their minds. You know, going to work every day with that fear of getting sick with coronavirus, not a good feeling. But let's get back to Mitch McConnell's argument here. So Republicans have long blamed, get a load of this, have long blamed that $1,400 direct payment to Americans for worsening inflation and helping keep people out of the workforce. Now let that sink in for a minute. $1,400 won't even cover half of the rent in most metropolitan areas of the country for 1 month. For 1 month. Homeboy's cashing checks from his corporate donors. He's trading individual stocks based on insider information, which we would go to prison for, but senators get to do it with impunity, of course. He thinks that $1,400 from like literally 2 years ago is what's persuading Americans to not work? What world does this guy live in? No, by the way, not a word about the Federal Reserve printing money, handing it over to corporations, handing it over to private equity firms. Not a word about how that led to record inflation for assets, record inflation in the housing market, record inflation, and I say inflation, but I mean, look, honestly, the reason why we're experiencing turbulence right now in the stock market is because the value of those shares are not, like based on nothing. It's not based on productivity, it's not based on sales, it's not based on the health of these corporations. It's based on corporate stock buybacks that happened with money that was provided by the Federal Reserve. Not a word about that because that helps his stock portfolio. Mitch McConnell's chillin'. He loves those corporate stock buybacks, loves it. He's heavily invested. But he's super salty about that $1,400 you got from the federal government years ago. We got to find a way to make them desperate. Got to pave the way for these corporate executives to exploit them. That's who Mitch McConnell is. That's right-wing populism for you. Disgusting. By the way, unemployment as we speak sits at a historic low of 3.6%. What is he talking about? Now, Moody's Analytics estimates that households did in fact build up extra cash, totaling $2.6 trillion from the beginning of the pandemic through the end of 2021. But let's also consider the fact that savings increased generally, right? Like they're not looking at a specific group of American workers. They're not looking at minimum wage workers and saying like, whoa, wow, look at this. During the pandemic, minimum wage workers were really stacking the cash. No, that Generally speaking, Americans, including those who were lucky enough to work from home, were able to save a little extra money because where would they spend it? Everything was shut down. Okay, but what is the situation today? Because remember, inflation is the other thing that these right-wingers complain about day in, day out. Understandably, inflation is hurting everybody, right? Okay, we should probably focus on corporations that have just decided to arbitrarily price gouge us so they can increase their corporate profits. Not a word about that from Mitch McConnell either. But let's take a look at the financial health of ordinary Americans today. So there have been some Americans who quit their jobs. Over the past 2 years, Americans have been quitting jobs at near record rates, but hiring and job openings remain strong. That indicates that many people are quitting for higher paying jobs, good for them, especially in low wage industries and the service sector, which seems to have struggled the most to hire and retain workers. Maybe they should consider paying their workers more to entice them to go back to their restaurants or to whatever service industry job they previously had. Turns out that they found work that pays them better. Free market, baby, what happened? Suddenly when the free market is used to the advantage of labor, don't love it so much anymore. Let's make them desperate so they have no choice but to go back to jobs where they're not paid enough and they're treated poorly. But let's get to the real heart of what's encouraging Mitch McConnell's dumb argument here. Kentucky, McConnell's home state, was briefly the epicenter of the Great Resignation. The sheer number of workers quitting and leaving the workforce was powered by structural conditions that existed long before the pandemic and were exacerbated by COVID-19. That includes lack of affordable childcare, a low minimum wage, and worries over safety during a still raging pandemic. Let's focus on minimum wage and childcare. If you've got kids to take care of, and you also have a minimum wage job, you can't afford childcare. It makes a lot more sense for you to stay home and be with your kids. Because again, your wages wouldn't even cover the childcare necessary for you to go to work. Mitch McConnell in that same speech bragged about defeating Build Back Better, which was the social spending bill that would have provided a social safety net for people, but more importantly, it would have provided childcare for Americans. So if they choose to go back to work, they could easily do so. He bragged about defeating that in the same speech. So which one is it? Do you want people to go back to work? Because if you do, a great way for you to use your position of power is to support them in that effort. But people like Mitch McConnell actively work against the American people. And what's amazing about all of this is the fact that even the United States Chamber of Commerce, the very business interests that fund these disgusting politicians who work against us on a daily basis, realizes, man, childcare is a little bit of a problem. Our businesses are having a little bit of an issue getting people back to work because childcare. What are we gonna do? Don't believe me? Here's a headline from a study done by the United States Chamber of Commerce. Data deep dive. A decline of women in the workforce. Data show that women who left the labor force during the pandemic, often to take on childcare duties, have not yet returned. Wow, what a shocker. Let's take a look at some of the data provided by this US Chamber of Commerce study. Many women resigned their careers due to lack of childcare. 58% of parents unable to find childcare, 26% of parents unable to afford childcare. In the last 2 years, 16,000 childcare centers were forced to close their doors, and many more were operating at limited capacity. This diminished the accessibility and affordability of childcare across the nation. In many cases, parents, most often women, stayed home to care for their children. Half of all workers and nearly 60% of parents cite lack of childcare as their reason for leaving the workforce. So go ahead and brag about defeating social spending programs that support families and make it easier for people to go back to work, Mitch. But you don't then get to turn around and paint people as lazy individuals who are just sitting on the sidelines, people who should be punished because they're allegedly flushed with cash. We live in America. There's only a few people at the very top who are flushed with cash. The rest of us are already either dealing with bankruptcy or are living on the edge or are just one health emergency away from joining those going through bankruptcy. That's what America's about. Unlike you, Mitch McConnell, ordinary Americans are not privy to insider information that they can just easily trade individual stocks on. So if that story made you angry, I feel you. Want to provide a little bit of relief by going to the final video here. Let's go to video D2. This will make you feel better, then we'll go to break. Just illustrative of leadership in this country in every way. Doesn't matter if you're talking about Democrats or Republicans. Just absolute goofs, absolute lunatics, people who don't fight for us, people who don't work on our behalf, people who fight against us and just use their position of power to enrich themselves. That's who Mitch McConnell is.